Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today our topic is how to recover from the fight or flight condition. The fight or flight condition is something people talk about as a stress response. They talk about feeling like their heart is beating fast, they feel a sense of anxiety, they feel a sense of rapid pulse and higher blood pressure sometimes. They feel a heightened sense of alertness and hypervigilance. They sometimes don't sleep so well, and they often have a digestion that isn't so robust because it's opposed by the stress response. There's a lot of things that can cause a stress response, and we're going to go through a bunch of them today in this short video. The autonomic nervous system is the system that controls your body naturally and automatically without you having to do anything about it. You don't have to think about your blood pressure. You don't have to think about your digestion. You don't have to think about your fingernails growing or your wounds healing or your hormones secreting or your body digesting or your body responding to stress. So the sympathetic nervous system is the part that overfires and it causes your body to be in the fight or flight mode. It makes your body be ready for anything. So it brings extra blood to your muscles and extra blood to your lungs and your heart so that you can fight or flight or freeze, or what they call fawn. Those are the four responses. Fighting is fighting back against something that bothers you. Flight is running away from it. Freeze is freezing like when there's a snake, and the best response is to freeze and not really run or fight, because with a snake it's best to freeze, at first at least. And then the fawn reflex is kind of submitting and being submissive. And those are all legitimate responses that animals and humans give when they're under stress or when they're under threat. So the regulation of these systems is redundant and they cross over each other. So we're going to start out with kind of the most direct, simple controls, all the way up to the faraway brain controls and hormonal controls that top-down regulate the system. So we're going to give you a bunch of strategies in this short video about that process. The direct controls, essentially when a person has a fight or flight response, they've got cortisol and adrenaline, or norepinephrine, which is secreted by their adrenal glands above their kidneys in the back, right at the flank area, right at the bottom of their rib cage, and right at their kidney level, above their belt line in the back side for both men and women. And those are the areas, the adrenal glands, that secrete these hormones under the control of other systems that we'll get to. And so, basic way to control them is to use herbs like ashwagandha and rhodiola rosea. These can be varied in their doses and help people with abnormal levels. Sometimes the cortisol is depleted, and sometimes the cortisol or adrenaline is excess. And there's ways to figure that out based on symptoms. Sometimes people have a flatline cortisol where they just can't wake up in the morning. Other times people have a massive cortisol burst where they're just super energetic and they're very aggressive and responsive. They mobilize blood sugar rapidly. Other times it's epinephrine, and epinephrine usually peaks at night and it keeps you awake. And sometimes it's not enough during the day and it makes you have an inability to learn and an inability to sustain focus and just not feel like you're very with it. These are all methods that these herbs help beautifully with. We also use omega-3 fats and magnesium. Omega-3 fats from fish oil and from plant oils like flax oil, blackcurrant seed oil. These are oils that will help a person make better hormone balance and have better adrenal balance. Magnesium is probably the most important mineral for this process. Many people have cholesterol and lipid imbalances where they have deficient cholesterol. Their total cholesterol could be below 140, which is pretty bad to have your total cholesterol be 140 in my opinion. And I don't really like that for most people because it really gives you unstable cardiac function and unstable brain function. So there is such a thing as too low a total cholesterol. We'd like to see normal triglycerides and normal HDL, although it's pretty normal to have high LDL, low density lipoprotein, or what we call bad cholesterol, which I hate that designation. But it is called bad cholesterol, even though it isn't bad cholesterol. It's possible that could be high on a lab test in an otherwise normal person that's eating a low-carb diet or that's trying to lose weight or that's on a keto diet or something like that. It happens a lot in my carnivores. So hypoglycemia is another reason why a person might have problems with their sympathetic nervous system, and that would be that they haven't eaten enough or they have an imbalanced electrolytes and protein in their body so that their cells suddenly crash when they're under demand. This happens a lot to very busy executives, entrepreneurs, people that own their own business. No matter whether you own your own business or you work for somebody else, if you've got a lot of stress and you start your morning, many times you can't do intermittent fasting and not eat breakfast because you have such a demand for blood sugar. And that usually has to do with how much cortical activity, how much body activity, whether you work in construction and you need to use your body right away in the morning, whether you're scooping up kids and picking them up right away in the morning, you may need fuel. And if you're very stressed, you may secrete a lot of cortisol to be ready for the boss or ready for the demands of the customer. And so you're going to be hypoglycemic. And if that's the case, you might get a sweaty forehead, you might get sweaty hands, you might get almost like a panic attack, you might feel a sense of irritability and snap at people, and you might feel kind of woozy, like you're going to pass out. It's not uncommon for that to happen as a sympathetic fight or flight stress condition from low blood sugar. If that's the case, just eating some carbs, just eating some fat, very often will help you feel better within just a few minutes. So it's useful to consider doing that. Also some electrolytes, a little bit of salt in water, a little bit of salt on your food. Sometimes that's enough to snap a person out of that hypoglycemia. In addition, people have sometimes galvanic skin resistance elevations, which is to say you can buy these devices online. They're little finger devices. They go on your skin and they detect the subtle sweat. Because when a person is a little bit under stress, they start to sweat a bit more, they secrete a little bit more salt, and they conduct electricity better through their skin. So whether it's their forehead, whether it's their fingers, which is the most common, there's a slight increase in conductivity. It makes it easier, less resistance for electricity to flow through a little device. So they put a little tiny device, you put a little tiny device wired up to your fingers, and usually it goes to your cell phone or some other device, your computer, and it monitors your galvanic skin resistance. This is part of the foundation of how lie detectors work, or polygraph. It's part of that process. But for your purposes, it's just for stress. So that when you have a high galvanic skin response, which means you have lots of electric flow through your skin, it means you're sweaty, it means you're stressed. When you're not stressed out, you have less sweating and higher resistance or lower flow of electricity through your skin, and you can detect that on a graph. And you can see on a little app on your smartphone or on tablet or on your computer that stress level has gone down or that resistance has changed. And so you can use GSR devices that only cost about $100 to figure out what your response is. What you see now is an example of a GSR device that you can use, that I use in my office. There are many others, but this is just one of them. Another method that's quite often used in some people that can tolerate it is ice immersion therapy or cryotherapy. Sometimes people get into a device where they stand up and they're blasted with cold air, and that's called cryotherapy. They do it for just a few seconds or a very short period of time at very cold temperatures in a clinic. Other times people use ice immersion. They put their hands in ice water, they put their feet in ice water for a short period of time, or they do an entire ice bucket challenge and they dump their whole body in ice. It can be very good for a person to reset their sympathetic nervous system. However, some people don't respond very well to this, but it is something that's been used quite a lot to reset the sympathetic nervous system, and it was used in hospitals before medication in the early 1900s to help people understand and deal with their stress level. And so it can be very useful for people that have lots of anxiety attacks or fight or flight conditions. But it should be something where you monitor your blood pressure and you don't have a heart condition or a kidney condition where you could really have shutdown of your kidneys or your heart. So just talk with your doctor if you're going to do complete ice immersion therapy. There is another method, which is the opposition method, where you use your parasympathetic nervous system to control your sympathetic nervous system. And this doesn't work in everyone, but it works quite well in most people. If you have autoimmune disease, it may be very difficult. This is called HRV, or heart rate variability. Once again, it's another electronic device that you can buy, that you can wear around your chest, under your shirt, that contacts your skin, and in some cases you can wear it on your finger. Some cases it's a ring, in some cases it's other type of attachment to your body that measures your heart rate variability. And so that is a parasympathetic function that measures how much time is between each beat of the heart. And it turns out that the heart shouldn't beat steadily every time. It should have a slightly expanding and contracting time interval. Not so much that it's a heart arrhythmia, which would be abnormal, but such that it's just variable. And so we want that normal biological variability instead of a metronome that's exactly regular like a robot or a computer every time, because that's not so healthy. So you want to measure your heart rate variability. We won't get into that today because it's a lot of statistics, but there's simple apps you can use on your phone to do this. And once again, those things cost about $200. Another thing that works very well to control the parasympathetics and stimulate them so that they inhibit the sympathetics is colonics and enemas. People can use home enemas, home colonics, and usually it's the warmth of the water and the expansile property of the water that expands the large intestine and that gives a person a sympathetic response. If you do it too rapidly or too heavily or too much, you could get a nausea feeling or a dizzy feeling or feeling like you're going to pass out, which happens sometimes. But generally, home enemas and colonics with qualified colon hydrotherapists are very, very safe. And in fact, it's a myth I want to dispel right now that you're going to blow up your colon and you're going to cause all kinds of problems. These colonics and enemas, if done properly, have less than 1 to 2 pounds per square inch, which is less than you generate pressure in your colon when you cough or you sneeze. Achoo! If you push out a bowel movement, you're going to have way more pressure than any colonic or home enema would generate. So please put that out of your mind. That's an old myth that was started by pharmaceutical companies to try to stop people from using natural methods, so throw it out. There is another method called castor oil compresses, which is a method of using oil heat to penetrate into your abdomen. So it's very useful to put these on your stomach, on your back, on your shoulders, and you simply put castor oil on your skin and then any heat source that you want. Just make sure that the heat source isn't going to short out. So if it's an electrical blanket or an electrical hot pack, make sure that it's not getting, wet and direct contact into the castor oil. So you might have to have a layer of something like plastic between you. But the point is castor oil is put right on the skin so that the castor oil penetrates through your skin, and it's very therapeutic, more than just a hot water bottle on your tummy. This can really calm down the fight or flight response. There's also top-down control by the pituitary gland, and this will be done by your medical doctor or your endocrinologist. This is when they suspect that you have a problem with your pituitary controlling your adrenal glands through the hormone ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone, and that's a hormone that your pituitary tells your adrenals to work and to put out cortisol. So you may not know if you have that problem, but if you have a pituitary problem, if you've had a problem with your pituitary gland and you've had difficulty with other hormones, maybe your vision's been closing in and you're losing some of your lateral peripheral field because of your pituitary gland being under pressure, you might go to the doctor and say, hey, I really need to get checked. I can't explain why I keep having problems with either too much or too little cortisol. And then my favorite part of this is the top-down control or the neurological control. This is the brain's control of the stress response. And this is the cerebral cortex, or the top of your head, and neurofeedback. That is where you go to counseling, you go to the psychologist, and you do talk therapy, you do photobiomodulation, which is where you put lasers or infrared lights on your head and shine lights through your skull. You go out in the sun and you get infrared light through your head, which penetrates quite deep into your brain and is very healthy. You use transcranial direct current stimulation, which is, again, a $100 device you can buy online that can activate your brain electrically, that you can do safely at home. This may be EMDR, where you go to a psychologist and they do EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprogramming or repatterning or reprocessing. And that's where you move your eyes back and forth during therapy with a qualified therapist, or you hold buzzers that buzz your hands like this alternately, or you hear buzzes in your ears. And this can be highly effective for stress and stress response. If you have a stress response, you might have a sleep disorder, and you might need to evaluate your sleep using some home monitoring screening devices. They're certainly not as accurate as a true sleep study, but sleep studies are expensive, so you might want to start with a home kit where you buy a device that you can wear in your sleep, like a ring or a wristband or a finger couplet. You could also have toxicity. You could have toxic chemicals, you could have sex hormone imbalances, and you might need to get a urine or saliva test or blood test for that. You could have autoimmunity, where your immune system is attacking your organs, and that would give you a massive stress response. You might have a metabolic deficit or a problem where you don't tolerate vitamin B12 or methylation. You might have trouble with folic acid. This is kind of a cluster of people that have certain genetic problems. It's only about 15% of people where you need different kinds of B vitamins in lower doses and different forms of B vitamins. You might need some lithium and lithium orotate and extra minerals. That's a problem for another discussion, but that does happen to people with massive stress. You could also have subluxation. There could be a problem of misaligned vertebra or dysfunctioning vertebra in your spine, in your legs, in your arms, in your shoulders, or in your skull, in your cranial bones. And so seeing a qualified chiropractor or other clinician that works with those things would be really important. Osteopaths do this. Some craniosacral massage therapists do this. So it's really important to get checked. I also think that acupuncture helps very much for stress. I use acupuncture for my own stress and my own life, and I think it works very, very well. And then lastly, I want to end on, there are legitimate stressors. There's 6 of them that you need to ask yourself as you screen your life. Now, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not here to counsel you like a therapist would, and I'm not your doctor. However, I think that you should go through these 6 in your life and look at them very quickly for stress and fight or flight. The first one is stresses with a relative. If you have stresses with a relative that you're dealing with, it could be property, it could be will with a dead relative, or it could be any kind of conflict with someone you live with or that you relate to. Maybe they're sick, maybe they're stressing you out. If you've got a relative that's got stress, that's a big source of stress. Another one is romantic stress. If your romantic partner is stressing you out, or you're stressing them out, or there's some relation problem, that's a big source of stress, so look at that. Number 3 is financial stress. Doctors don't talk about financial stress enough. And in today's economy with the Fed and the World Bank and the central banks of the world, this is a big deal, and it's growing bigger and bigger with the threat of CBDCs coming. I think that's a big deal, and I think it relates to healthcare. If you can't have good money, if you can't have sound money, if you can't have the ability to own property, if you can't have secure ability to hedge against inflation and save your hard-earned labor over time and make a retirement, you have a problem. And we have a big problem with that in the United States and the Western world and Europe. If you have a spiritual conflict, if you have a difficulty about your religion or your spirituality, or a conflict with your morality or your life or your lifestyle, you may need to talk to some clergy or some friends or read some books or talk to a spiritual counselor who may be able to help you with that particular process. There could be a fulfillment, work or meaning or art or expression problem where you're not doing what you feel you're put here to do. You're toiling away at a job you don't like, or you don't have time for a hobby that you really like. You're not able to express your artfulness. Maybe you secretly want to be a sculptor, or you want to be a musician and you don't get a chance to do that, or maybe your work doesn't feel meaningful. I'm not saying you have to find meaning from work, but if you can't find meaning from work or your recreation, you've got a problem. And you need to find out what you're missing and explore that. It may not be at work. It's got to be either at work or when your time is off. And if you don't have that meaningful expression and you don't feel fulfilled, that can be a huge source of stress. And I talk with my patients about that quite a bit. And then lastly of the 6 is a new or an old unresolved chronic health problem that drives stress. Like if you've got a new diagnosis of cancer, or you have an old diagnosis of spinal radiculopathy or diabetes and it's not resolving, these types of old or new health diagnoses can really drive stress. You may need to talk to a doctor or become part of a group. The secret, if you haven't noticed, for all these conditions is that if you have biochemical individuality that makes your particular problem maybe fight or flight and somebody else has something different, the solutions are kind of all the same. I don't know if you've noticed that. If you have, I hope you come back.